Hi everyone, this is going to be the first video in my new series about how to get faster at one-handed. In this video, I'm going to be talking solely about turning, as I think it is the most important aspect of all of one-handed solving. When starting out, it's really hard to get good turning. I think there's just a high barrier of entry associated with one-handed solving. So it's good to have a good reference of what you should be doing. Before you start anything though, I do recommend that you kind of take care of your hands. And what I mean by this is just actually stretching out. And I recommend doing this with both hands, even if you're just going to be solving with OH. Just make sure you definitely get a good stretch on each finger and that you're all loose and warmed up. I would definitely refrain from doing OH if your hands are cold. This is also just a good tip in general for cubing. Once you have that out of the way, you definitely want to now choose which hand you're actually going to be doing OH with. The common consensus is that you want to use your non-dominant hand. The reason for this is that when you're doing two-handed, you're either mainly doing R U-turns or L U-turns. If you're doing R U-turns most of the time, then it would be more favorable to use your left hand because just the way you're going to hold the cube naturally, you're going to be able to access these right and top layers much easier. And the opposite would apply if you're doing mainly LU moves, you would use your right hand. This is really important, and I see a lot of people kind of using their dominant hand when they really shouldn't be really early on, and then it just becomes really difficult to switch back. Another note before we get into the actual turning, I just want to stress that it's really important to understand that building finger strength takes a really long time, and this will only improve with consistent practice. Something that can help with building finger strength is setting up a routine where you just practice doing some triggers. This was an idea that was proposed by Phil Yu, and I actually did this back when I started doing OH. I believe he just showed a few triggers like R, U2, R prime U, and just doing these at a set amount of intervals for a set amount of repetitions, similar to a weight training program. This can be something that can help you just get a good amount of repetitions in. I personally would recommend practicing going through every single turn at least 3 different times per day, especially when you're starting out, as that's when it's the most new and when it's going to feel the most awkward on your fingers. Later on, as you progress, this is going to become less and less necessary. With all that out of the way, let's get into the actual turning. OH turning mainly consists of R and U turns. As such, it's really important to hold the cube in such a way that you have easy access to these sides of the cube. I personally hold the cube with my thumb here in the front face on this bottom left corner and my middle and ring fingers on the back, stabilizing everything. This leaves my pinky and my index finger free to turn the cube. To do R turns, I'll put my pinky in the back down right sticker and just push up, or flick up rather. For R prime turns, my pinky will come here to the FDR sticker and push down. At first you may struggle, or it may cause a bit of strain to move your pinky in such a way, but this won't happen as much as the more you practice it. For U prime, I put my finger on the back left up sticker and I just flick. For U-turns, I put my finger on the F on the front left top sticker and I also just flick in the other direction. Once again, this U-turn could be a bit problematic if you're just starting out, but I promise with more practice, your finger will just get used to making this turn. Doing R and U moves this way is really important because whenever you do an R move, your pinky just naturally lifts up, ready to do another R prime. And whenever you do a U prime, your finger's just in a natural spot to do a U afterwards. And this also applies in the other directions. If you do an R prime, then you're ready to do an R. And if you do a U, you're ready to do a U prime. This is really important for one-handed because it allows the ability to do these really high TPS blitzes of turning. Other turning styles don't really allow for this. Let's now incorporate some more turns. Next important, I would say, is D. You want to do D with your ring finger since it's already on the layer. So for this, I'll readjust my thumb, since if I do D here, then obviously my thumb will be blocking the layer. So I'll shift my thumb up like this and do a D by flicking this sticker with my ring finger. D prime is a bit unique. Here I'll actually be pushing on the left back down sticker just by doing this. I find it extremely awkward to do the same thing as R and U, which would kind of involve putting my ring finger here and pushing like this. I find it much more comfortable to alternate these like this. Next is F. I think F turns are extremely underrated in one-handed. If you're able to execute F moves very cleanly, then it opens up a lot of doors, especially for F12. To do F, I actually use my thumb and I kind of rotate the layer by pushing onto this entire side. So I start from the bottom here and I push up like this. Following the theme with the other turns, this might be a bit difficult to do at first, but it's very important that you just keep practicing it and it'll become easier to do over time. For F prime, I just use my index finger to push down on the ULF sticker. A lot of algorithms, especially for last layer, will require the use of double turns. So it's important to have good finger tricks for those as well. I do R2 like this with my pinky first for the first R and then my ring finger. And then I just put it together. Usually if I'm doing an R2 trigger and then I have to do R prime, since my ring finger already comes up like this, it's much easier to do that next R prime with my ring finger and then return to using my pinky for any future R primes. An example of this is this counterclockwise U prime from the back, where you would start with the double flick to do the first R2, and then use your ring finger for the next R prime, and then your pinky for the remaining R moves. So just once again, really slowly. For U2, there's actually a special finger trick, if you want to call it that. It's called the Ido. And this is also something really important for one-handed. Basically, you start with a normal U prime. And since your finger is already here, you just finish the turn by pushing on the same sticker. This is a really nice finger trick because it flows and it can help execute algs much smoother. An alternative for U2 is doing a double flick. So using your middle finger after your index finger for the second U prime. Back on the note of the Ido, it was also important to be able to do it in both directions. So if you're able to do Ido like this, you should be able to also just start in this position and do Ido in reverse. For wide turns, I recommend just executing them the same as you would the normal turn. So for wide U, I would recommend doing this for wide U and something like this for wide U prime, and something like this for wide F and this for wide F prime. For wide R, I actually use my ring finger. There are very few instances where I would recommend doing L moves, but it is still important to know how to do them. To do an L, I'll push down on this back sticker with my index finger and make sure I move my thumb out of the way. Here's an example where knowing how to do that L move can be useful for this L perm case. I actually never find myself doing L prime, but if I did have to do it, I would do a Z rotation and just do a U prime. For B moves, I would recommend only doing B, the actual B move, without rotating, and I would execute it like this. What I'm doing is readjusting my grip on the cube by putting my ring finger on the bottom and holding the back like I always do with my middle finger, and then using my index finger to make the actual B turn. I find myself rarely using this finger trick, but it could be useful. For B prime, again, similar to L prime, I would just rotate up like this and just do a U prime. Using these turns, you can pretty much do anything with one-handed. A few unique finger tricks that come to mind would be the D2 finger trick with your ring and pinky, or your pinky and your ring finger. Or this unique way of doing R2, where you do a normal R prime and then push on this sticker. These finger tricks don't come up as much in one-handed, but once again, it is still useful to know them. If you're just starting out, I would recommend going back to each of those individual turns and just mimicking them on your cube. A really important thing to note is that if you're feeling any sort of discomfort or soreness, you should stop immediately. It can be really tempting to just find a less taxing way of doing a specific turn, but this won't help you in the long run. For example, I see a lot of people doing R moves with their ring finger because naturally, as it is a stronger finger, it's much easier to do R turns with your ring finger. But if you're able to build up the strength in your pinky, then you will just have an easier time with blitzing TPS later on. Next, let's talk about rotations, as these are, of course, very important. You want to spend as little as time possible rotating. I think this is fairly straightforward and obvious to understand. I think it's very natural to just slowly be sure of your rotation when you're either doing like a Y turn like this, but you really should just basically be like throwing the cube around to reduce the time you're spending rotating. This leads me into my final topic, which is table abuse. I personally have always had a love-hate relationship with table abuse. I personally don't do it as much, but I do see the advantages of it, and specifically with rotations, I think it saves quite some time. If you're able to quickly put down the cube and pick it up in a way that helps you rotate much faster than if you were just doing something like this, then you should absolutely go for it. The problem I have with rotating is that I think people usually use table abuse instead of just developing good technique. There can be an alg that maybe just has a few too many awkward turns in it, and instead of just practicing and working through those more complex parts of the alg, people just will more naturally rely on just putting the cube down and readjusting their hand position, and that'll just make it more comfortable. I'll try to illustrate what I'm talking about with table abuse using a few PLLs. It can be really normal to kind of go through the alg normally, and then at this last part, kind of put the cube down to do the simultaneous U prime D and finish the alg. I personally would just avoid this table abuse and do the U prime D with the cube still in the air and finish. Another example is just the F perm. The first F prime here, it can be more natural to just put the cube down here and then continue. But if you just develop a good F prime, then you can just continue the alg without having to put the cube down. This is a decision for you to make. I personally try to minimize the table abuse in my solves and only reserve it for an example like the previous one where it would be faster to rotate, or for very specific algorithms where table abuse is just simply the fastest option. While I do think it is important to get actual solves and practice in, good technique is always going to be the most important thing, especially when in regards to turning. With that, that's all I have to say for turning. If there is anything that you think I might have missed in this video, please just leave it in the comments. I am more than happy to either respond to your comment or make an amendment sort of video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next part.